excited to hear about all the plans at Husky Stadium for next year. It's looking good. But always like touch base with the media when I'm here, and happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Do you have any updates on the Pac-12 network? How are negotiations with DirecTV and some other cable networks?
Yeah, so no substantive update. At last count, we've got over 40 cable operators carrying the Pac-12 network, including the biggest out there, Comcast, Time Warner, and Cox, and of course we have Dish Network. So no substantive updates on DirecTV or others. We continue to hope that they're going to carry the network. That's our intention. Make sure all Pac-12 fans across the country can get it. And offer the same fair offer that the other 40 plus have accepted. So we hope that they'll listen to their customers and our fans and take it soon.
What are your hopes the ADs accomplish in regard to the injury report after they discuss it at their next meeting?
Yeah, so I don't yet have a specific proposal. Currently doing due diligence during these trips. I'm using this as an opportunity to meet with our ADs individually. I'm talking to our coaches. I'm talking to others that are around, getting the media's perspective as well. And it's a very challenging situation from what I can tell in terms of the needs and expectations of the media and the rules under which they work, and some of the issues that our coaches are seeing. So this is not something that's been on the conference's radar since I came here. It's just something that was dealt with locally, and each program and each set of media seemed to be operating fine. The first really I saw of an issue was this season. And it seems like we've had a flurry of activity on the issue throughout the conference. So I kind of raised my hand and said, some of the things I'm seeing here are troubling, and I want the conference to step in and at least look at it and examine it and determine whether this really is something best left for the individual campuses and local media to figure out what's the right answer, whether a conference policy might make sense. I don't know what the answer is yet. What I'm doing is meeting with as I'm traveling around, and my staff looking at each of the local situations here, and I've also had the opportunity to talk to some of my colleagues in the other conferences. We're not the only conference that has to deal with this issue, so I'm studying what the ACC's done, and they've got a policy. I studied with Big East, and they tried to have a policy, and then didn't have a policy, and the SEC considered a policy and didn't implement one. So I'm also learning what other conferences have done, how they've dealt with the situation, and we're going to discuss it openly at our meeting. I don't necessarily expect anything concrete to come out of that would affect this season, middle of the season, and there's a lot of complexity to the issue, obviously. But we're going to discuss as a conference, which I think is appropriate.
Do you have any idea or thoughts on how you would enforce such a policy?
That's one of the huge issues. The NFL enforces the policy with massive fines, but I think there's a real question as to how enforceable it really is, and I never would want to start a policy it couldn't enforce or was too difficult to enforce. So that's going to be one of the considerations.
What's been the general vibe you've gotten from the ADs that you've talked to? What has been the general vibe when you bring it up about a unified or?
Well, I think everyone's glad we're looking at it. I mean, our conference, across the board has been willing to look at things that traditionally it hadn't looked at and take a fresh perspective at things. So. I think that's indicative of a lot of things that we've done. But there are, as you all know, there are wide-ranging opinions and policies that exist. We've got some programs that are completely open, and we've got some that are completely closed, and some in between that have created problems. So there is no consistent point of view, which is what makes it a challenging thing.
What do you think of the ACC's policy, since they're the only one that has it? Yeah. They're able to do it.
So I'm intrigued by their policy, and what I've got my team doing is talking to people on the ground to see how it works in practice. From my understanding, it's essentially voluntary. Yeah. It's an honor.
The coaches have voted it in.
Yeah, it's an honor system. Yeah. So my sense is that works if the coaches are all on board, because it's an honor system, and they're not enforcing it. There's no penalties. So obviously there was a spirit of cooperation, all for one for all, and they're doing it. I don't think that exists in our conference. There's many varied perspectives, so I don't know that a voluntary policy would work in our conference.
Would it have to be unanimous, or could 9-3 take it?
It could in theory, but going back to Dennis's comment, if it's not something that you can enforce outside of an honor system, then that doesn't really work. it's still too early for me to say exactly where I think we'll net out on it. But there's a lot of complexity. I very much understand the dilemma the media are in. Being asked to cover something they can't completely report on. And respect that, and they've gotten sensitized to some of those challenges and issues and the ethics involved in that from a journalistic standpoint. I certainly also understand coaches' perspective about competitive disadvantage and wanting everyone on an even playing field. So there's not. The reason it's an issue is not something that's necessarily easily resolvable. It doesn't mean we're not going to look at it and see if we can help with a path forward.
Do you feel like a standardized policy would have eliminated some of the problems that, say, for example, USC had last week?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if there was a conference policy and everyone could say we're following the conference policy, and everyone would live with that, I think that would make it. It would have eliminated some of the issues that we're even about, and it's seemingly changing day to day.
What's your views on the NFL style, and do you think that would be the kind of the mold to go by?
Well, I think the big differences between the NFL and college generally, and a lot of our campuses, do raise some philosophical issues, and we're starting to get into that about students and some of the laws that apply and things like that. So there are some fundamental differences, but I think vis-a-vis a policy, the NFL has got very significant fines that they are prepared to invoke if someone doesn't follow the policy, and that's not something at this stage I think would really work in college. But
Larry, where did things stand with talking with the Big 12 about potentially having a champion or replacement team have a bowl game against the lower five?
Yep. So I've read those reports that there are a lot of discussions coming out of our Chicago meetings last week. We all got together, the commissioners from the different conferences, discussed a whole host of issues that are still unresolved about how the whole system will work. What we have resolved is that we're going to have a 14 playoff inside the bowls and neutral site national championship game, which was the big step. Now there's a myriad, number of details that need to be worked out, including how many access bowls will there be? Will there be a seventh contract bowl? If so, who will play in it? How's revenue sharing going to work? TV going to work, etc. So coming out of those meetings, what you read about is there is a discussion going on around the seventh bowl. There's a discussion Big 12 and I, have had about the possibility, but we're also discussing other possibilities as well. So I think the reports I saw made it maybe seem a little bit further along and a little bit more concrete than I would describe it as. And it's a very fresh conversation coming out of Chicago last week. So I wouldn't describe it as far along as some of the reports that I read, but I'm certainly happy to, will confirm that it's a conversation that's being had.
How far along? So you're saying it's not that far along. How far along would you say? Like, if you had to say between baby steps.
About 7 days.
Okay, so very fresh is what you basically said.
We were together last week in Chicago, and there was a discussion amongst all the commissioners last week about the possibility of a seventh bowl. And the reason is, as we move forward, we know we've accomplished a lot by going to a playoff. And it would be 14 and a committee. There's some fundamental things that we've agreed on. But there's an ongoing concern some other conferences have had about AQ, non-AQ, access, those types of issues. And in that conversation, I think there was a consensus that we could all imagine a seventh bowl game to make sure there's more access points going forward for all conferences than existed in the past. In my view, I'd love, given that there's so much positive about the new system going forward, about having a playoff and a neutral site national championship game, I think it would be a real shame if all that progress and all that success is clouded by continued discussions about access and haves and have-nots. So, I hope that with all the progress that we're making, that I'm certainly in favor of creating more access points and kind of making that conversation hopefully something of the past.
Larry, who would sell that? Who would sell that bowl?
I was having a conversation with some folks today about that. Up till now, there's been a sense that if conferences want to go out and do deals for their champions, like we did with the Big Ten, the Rose Bowl, we went out and sold that game independently. Mm-hmm. The Big 12 and SEC went out and sold the TV rights for their champions to play independently. The ACC went out and sold the Orange Bowl independently. So I think there's a sense that this would probably work the same way if there was a seventh bowl that was going to be a contract bowl for the champions from 5 conferences, that they would have the right. Certainly, that's the feeling my fellow commissioners and I had. They would have the right to do the same thing. What is then going to get sold from the center is the championship game,
Right.
the remaining semifinals, and
The access
so-called access
bowls.
bowls.
But
So
would
that
you be
hasn't
partners with the Pac-12, Big 12, and the Group of 5 be partners in selling that 7th bowl, or would it just be the Group of 5?
Again, it hadn't been decided that we are doing that, but
Okay.
if we did it, I think it would be very similar to the role the SEC and Big Ten play with the ACC in this Orange Bowl arrangement.
So both sides.
Yeah, it would be a closed bowl.
Right, contract bowl.
Yeah. So I'd say it is very analogous and parallel to what the Orange Bowl just did. It's got a champion on one side, which is an ACC champ, and then on the other side, it's going to be a rotation of non-champions from SEC and Big Ten. I think an easy way to think about this idea, again, we haven't decided to do it yet, but this idea would be the same thing. You'd have a champion on one side of the game playing against probably a non-champion from the Big 12 and Pac-12 and possibly others.
Didn't the ACC, though, sell that on their own?
The ACC sold it. Yeah,
Right.
that's my understanding.
Because this is different. You'd have a group of 55 schools on one side,
Yeah.
and then 2 partners on the other.
It's a little unclear right now exactly who would sell it. There's a lot of details, as you know, that still need to be worked through with this thing. I mean, the main tent poles of the new structure and concept are in place, but there's a lot of details that need to get worked out. It's going to take months. I mean, I don't expect we're going to have all the I's dotted and T's crossed for another 6 to 9 months on it.
Larry, in the Pac-12's been unable to do more than 2 weeks out on start times for games. Have you gotten blowback from fans about the degree of annoyance with that?
You know, I hear from fans often about start times and all that, but the idea of 12-day picks and 6-day picks is not something new in the conference. It's certainly when I came in, that was part of our existing TV agreements.
But there's a lot more per school now.
Yeah, well, what we've tried to do is, lock in homecoming dates and lock in the first 3 weeks in advance. But, I think this 12-day, 6-day is one of the modern, realities of the way it works. With the investments being made by TV broadcasters, they, when they agree to step up and make the kind of investment that they make, they want to make sure they have to follow the narrative of a season. And you get hot teams and teams that maybe were preseason thought to be, really hot, and they turn out not to be. And they just want to make sure that they're getting, when they get their picks, that they have the most current knowledge possible. But we realize that there's a, the fan that's buying a ticket and attending the game has to be respected as well. That's part of the push-pull with this thing.